It's my pleasure to welcome you here today at a side event organized by CZECH, Czech Psychedelic Research Foundation, and the director behind the computer over me. You should approach after the side event for discussion, and also the distinguished panelist, which is from on my right side first, Professor Jiří Horáček, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, Dr. Pavel in the middle, current Czech drug coordinator as well as a clinician, and Dr. Pachta, former among others, former INCB member. So please let me welcome you again at the side event about legal access to Czech Republic for medical psilocybin. So without further ado, Pavel will start. Thank you.
With the support of digital technology, we will have beautiful pictures. So the next one, please. Question for me is and was why psychedelics, and namely, can we just next slide? Perfect. So why psychedelics, and namely psilocybin, for whom and how? And the questions behind, where does it work? So what the neuroscience is telling us? Do we know enough about the mechanisms of actions to really get the law just be adopted by the members of the parliament? How the safe profile looks like, and we've been confronted with a lot of prejudices on one side, the evidence showing what are the effects. So I am not a neuroscientist. I am a clinician. This gentleman is neuroscientist, not only among many other roles and functions, also as a clinician. But it's clear that we are somehow touching the area of trauma and what trauma causes in the emotional brain. This next one. And what we see is the reality that psychedelics and MDMA also as an atypical substance, which is sometimes being a part of the psychedelic cluster, sometimes not. However, attacking the prefrontal cortex as a directorate of the emotional brain, and in few words, through a complicated process, I took this slide from Jiří, and he might be the right person to talk about that. However, just using psychedelics, we see enormous changes in the morphological structure of the emotional brain, which are the answers, partial answers, because we don't know everything yet. Why does that work? The answer for the question number one. Next slide. So the Czech Parliament has adopted at the end of May last year the new legal instrument to introduce psilocybin not under the clinical trial setting, but simply under the clinical, just purely clinical context setting. I am making these differences because the Czech Republic, through the National Institute of Mental Health and Professor Horáček job, has a long-term experiences working with various psychedelics, and including psilocybin for wide or certain spectrum of diagnostic categories. The next one, please. The major indications, and I was looking at Jiří's slide. Professor Horáček is going to touch it again. Treatment-resistant depression, existential distress, searching for help, dealing with the terminal stages of oncological disorders, but we see a lot of indications which are not listed here, for example, on the neurological side, neurodegenerative, severe, life-threatening neurodegenerative disorders. And the third category is interesting because life-threatening mental states, including trauma, PTSD, addictions, allowing us in a condition where we see that the standard treatment does not work, and the condition is life-threatening to involve the patient client in psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. The next one. It's just simply for medical use, for therapeutic purposes. So we are introducing to the Czech legal framework the new term, psilocybin for the medical use. Next one. Who? Healthcare providers, indications, again, Jiří will probably touch it, psychiatrists or physicians with additional qualification, medical psychotherapy, on-site administration only, no home take supply. Next one. The substance is individually prepared. This is a special category which is probably well known to you. Approved facility licensed by the Ministry of Health. Patients certainly older than 18, but it's a question for future, at least from my clinical perspective, and certainly keeping records. Next one. I skip that, just only highlighting that the regulation from the governmental side is quite strong. And I am not so happy because of that, but I understand the aspect of preventive measure introduced within the control system in order to prevent the overkills which could possibly endanger the practical implementation of the PAP, which is abbreviation for the psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. Certainly, sanctions for not respecting or breaking the rules and the standards, including the best practice and recommended guidelines, which are going to be probably touched. The next one. Yes, this is what I already mentioned. Please, next one. Final slide is linked with our current activity, and I'm just using that only for simple purpose that even in the Czech Republic, looking at the prevalence of pharmacoresistant depressions or other affective disorders, or the resistant PTSD, approximately 50%. So even in the Czech Republic, looking at the clinical target population, which should be eligible for PAP, for psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, still we do have a lot of trouble how to make sure that the professional capacities are in place. But taking seriously into account the reality of Ukraine, where we try to assist in delivering for war trauma and PTSD effective instrument in cases where the antidepressants and other pharma stuff does not work, or standard treatment, including the psychotherapy. In Ukraine, we are confronted with the estimates 14 million of traumatized people by war, with many of them exposed PTSD symptoms. And we do see more than 70% of Ukrainian population being diagnosed with depression or some other severe affective disorders, and using psychopharmacotherapy, mainly antidepressants. So the question for me from the strategic perspective is, okay, We are slowly introducing the path for the clinical purposes in the Czech Republic. Be extremely careful, involving the strong governmental regulation. But if we wish to support Ukraine in dealing with post-war trauma, I think all these regulation models are absolutely unuseful because we would be, and I don't think that 40 million people would suffer from PTSD, but my personal estimate is probably 1.5, maybe 2 million people. Still, it's enormous target population, which is generating a challenge even for us thinking about the control instruments introduced by the government and taking seriously in account the restrictions of the control, which will not make sure that such intervention will be accessible to everyone who needs it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Professor Horáček, then to Dr. Pachta, and then we will do discussion. Okay.
So welcome here. Thank you for coming. My name is Jiří Horáček. I'm a psychiatrist. Currently, I hold the position of Director of National Institute of Mental Health of Czech Republic. And it's a great honor for me to be familiar with the current position of Czech Republic, psilocybin treatment. Practically, I will speak about the law, the new Psilocybin Act, which was approved last year. And now we are in the implementation phase, and my intention is to make the details about the law. Next slide, please. By Czech Parliament members, by gross majority of them, was approved the Act number 270. It's an act amending the criminal code, and which enables medical psilocybin treatment. So now we are in when it's fully legal to use psilocybin for the specific treatment under some specific conditions. The act is active from January this year, and we are starting to collect the experiences by the regular psilocybin in psychiatry. Why in Czech Republic? Why such an important step was done there? Because psilocybin or psychedelic research has a long tradition in Czech Republic. In the 60s, it was very popular to study specifically LSD. Czech Republic also produced its own LSD, and LSD was used in the 60s for treatment for almost everything. Psychiatry was like aspirin or that time. After the restrictions in 1971 and the regulation at the level of the United Nations. So it was restricted in Czech Republic as well as in other countries, but we renewed the research after 2000. We began with animal studies in our institute, published a lot of studies, papers on mechanism of action of psychedelics at the level of animal models, rats, brain. Next slide, please. Then we continued with the healthy volunteers studies. So we administered ketamine and psilocybin. Many else, volunteers, psychologists, psychiatrists, many students, and nurses, and now we continue almost exclusively with the clinical studies in clinical population. Now we finished one study when we compared the antidepressant effect in treatment-resistant depression of psilocybin and ketamine. Both these drugs are studied in our institute, and this is the first study comparing head-to-head these two compounds with psychedelic properties. Next study, which we are running now, is the study on depression in oncological patients. It's very interesting. About this indication, say a little bit more. And the next study is 5 beyond Alzheimer disorder. We are beginning with this, and we also collaborate with Ukrainian colleagues, and we are introducing there the ketamine for treatment of trauma or in military personnel and veterans. So these are our studies. So the tradition and psychedelics in Czech Republic also do not have bad reputation, but quite good reputation due to the tradition. And that's also the fact that really the gross majority of MPs vote for this law. So now we can use psilocybin for medical use. This is the individualized medical product. So it is prepared in the pharmacy for the concrete patients. We had a very busy autumn because it was approved in summer, and from the January of this year, the law is active. So we have to prepare not only the legislation but also the practical things like the guidelines, the clinical guidelines. So we prepared them. So psilocybin is allowed to use by professionals and by clinics and hospitals with the authority of Ministry of Health or with special permission deal with this controlled substances. So it is so here we have clinical guidelines which dedicate or indicate the indication, the diagnosis, dosages, dispensing limits, the necessary qualification for the physicians. It's very important, and the duration of the treatment. Next slide, please. So what are the indications? So the first indication is depressive disorder associated with cancer. Sometimes this diagnosis is called also as the existential distress. It's very severe condition that patients with severe life-threatening disorders suffers from depression. This depression is very badly reacting to standard treatment, to standard antidepressants. Antidepressants are almost ineffective, and also psychotherapy is not very effective during this life-threatening condition. The specific characteristics of psilocybin and other psychedelics, which is able to deal with undealable problems like death, for example. To deal or to cope with the facing the death is very problematic psychologically. And the standard, and we do not have the standard psychological except faith how to deal with mortality. That's the problem. But psychedelics really can give some different angle of view on that point, that they can break the problem. In person, I treated many patients with existential distress, oncological patients, because I'm the PI of that study, and it's very impressive how well it works. The people are one day they are severely depressed, thinking only about grave, about death, and it's preoccupied by such thoughts. And the next day after the psilocybin setting, they are completely fine, and they start bored, practice yoga, meditate. It's really a substantial change. It has very high level of humanity. That's this indication. The second indication, which is approved in Czech Republic, is severe depression resistant to standard treatment. This is the major indication. I know that you are not psychiatrists, but for us psychiatrists, what's very impressive on psychedelics is the fast onset of the antidepressant response. Normally, when I administer antidepressant, we can expect the clinical effect after 1 or 2 months. In this case, it's on the same day, so unbelievable how it is. And the second characteristic that psilocybin is in 70% of cases active or effective in patients who do not respond to standard treatment. So this is the second indication. And the third indication, which we have in the clinical guideline we prepare, is understanding of another serious psychiatric disorder, which is very severe and which threats the patient's life at the moment. So this is the indication, for example, for suicidal patients who are addicted, dependent patients, or patients with severe forms of anorexia. Sometimes we administer ketamine or psilocybin in these patients, and it's a really life-threatening condition, and it can be solved or substantially improved by psilocybin. So there is this second group of disorders which are allowed according to the Czech law or the guidelines. It's allowed to. So We also dedicated specifically the team members, so we conduct the treatment. So there is a referring physician, so somebody who refer the patient for the specific treatment, somebody who holds the position to control all indications and contraindications are fulfilled the concrete patients. So typically it's psychiatrist or any other physician of any other specialty. Second is supervising physician, so it has to be the medical doctor who is responsible for the somatic complications and for the setting. The setting lasts typically 4 to 6 hours, so it's very long. It's quite expensive. In case of psilocybin, there are very few somatic side effects, but some there are problematic. Typically, psilocybin increase the blood pressure up to 20 millimeters. So the patients have to be compensated from the cardiac point of view. We have to check the blood pressure and the vital signs during the setting and to offer the psychological support to the patient. To conduct the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is quite complicated, and so the specialist therapists are needed, and the therapist has to be fully qualified from psychology or psychiatry. First, second, they have to have the standard psychotherapeutic license and training. In Czech Republic, it lasts 5 years. The standard approval for the permission to administer psychotherapy, medical psychotherapy, and third level is they have to be specialized for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So they have an additional training for psychedelic psychotherapy. This additional training lasts half a year, and it consists of, let's say, about 200 hours of full training. So these are the prerequisites for the team. Next slide, please. Now we are in the transitional phase because the training is running, but the law is active. So now we accept, for example, the therapists who participated in some clinical trials. In Czech Republic, there is many clinical trials dedicated to psychedelics. So people who are trained in these pharma industries and sponsor trials are allowed to administer psilocybin under these medical conditions instead of having the advanced training, the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Yes, for 2 years we have the transitional period. There hope is the problem of qualification in this way. Yes. Yes, there are 3 regimes which are allowed. The typical regime, we typically start with a single administration. This is the indication, for example, for the existential distress in oncological patients. Yes, one administration is enough. Yeah, so that's all. Or if you want to break through the resistant depression, yes, we administer once. Then we continue with the standard treatment. In case of psilocybin, the problem is that the effect is slow-lasting antidepressant effect. In case of ketamine, it's only 1 week. The duration of the full antidepressant effect, but in case of psilocybin, it's approved that the effect is lasting 2 to 3 months. Yeah, so as this form of psychotherapy is fully introduced, so we can expect that instead of taking every day high doses of antidepressants, the patients will be treated by repeated doses once 2 or 3 months. That's the final aim. Yeah, instead of taking standard antidepressants on daily. So repeated doses is the second regime, and the third regime, which we use typically for psychotherapy, is dose ascending regimes, where we start with lower dose to make the patient to be familiar with the intoxication and with the drug, and then we escalate up to the full dose of 25 milligrams. That's the variant. That's a high dose, which is now the standard. So that's the current position in Czech Republic. We are dealing hardly with implementing the law. What's not yet solved is the finance, the coverage. Yeah, in Czech Republic, all treatments are covered by insurance companies fully. This treatment is quite expensive. expensive by the time of therapists, because normally one patient are two therapists, and the treatment is lasting 6 to 8 hours. Yeah, so and people is too paid, so it's extremely expensive. So now we are negotiating with the major insurance company and with the Ministry of Health how to cover it and how to finance some limited number of patients for the first year from the insurance. Now we bought the psilocybin. It's in pharmacy now, and so we are starting to make and to collect some experiences, share that with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the last but not least, Dr. Pachta, among others, Deputy Secretary of the INCB, and then later also elected member of the INCB until June last year, right?
Okay,
Thank you, Pavel.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, and thank you also for coming. And it's, I do not have to say too much. It was that here, but I would like to help to answer one question. Is this what the Czech Republic doing? Is it in line with the international drug control treaties? Because people understand psilocybin, well, this is a psychotropic substance included in Scale 1 of several conventions. These are prohibited substances. So how is it from the point of view of international law? My answer immediately in the beginning, when you start, is yes, the Czech legislation and the regulations are in line with the 1971 convention. And let's now have a look at it more in detail. In Article 5 of the 1971 Convention is stated that the use of psychotropic substances should be limited to medical and scientific purposes, and with some exceptions for industrial use. But in that Article 5, it is mentioned that for substances in Scale 1 of the 71 Convention, government should implement the provisions referred to in Article 7. And I put in this slide, so Article 7 is entitled Special Provisions Regarding Substances in Scale 1. So it is stated there that in respect of substances in Scale 1, the parties shall A, prohibit all use, but very important, except for scientific and very limited medical purposes, by duly authorized persons in medical establishments which are directly under the control of the governments or specifically approved by them. So you can see there is no absolute prohibition of the use of these substances. Governments, please remain with the first one. So governments should prohibit, except for scientific and very limited medical purposes. We have some terms here: very limited medical purposes, by duly authorized persons, in medical establishments, etc. To understand what the convention really means under this terminology, it is good for lawyers to look in the commentary on the convention. That commentary is usually produced by the United Nations very short after the adoption of the convention. We have such commentary on the Psychotropic Substances Convention. There are explanations regarding these treaty provisions. So please, next slide. And we can analyze them a bit. So what does it mean, very limited medical purposes? Well, already in the commentary, you can read that these substances were put in Scale 1 because they were considered to have no therapeutic or very limited therapeutic usefulness, if any, but that this may change in time. And this is quite possible that these substances will find therapeutic use. So, however, if they are still in Scale 1, so medical indications for which substances, these very limited medical purposes, means medical indications for which a substance not listed in Scale 1 and having at least equally effective properties is not available. Now, we have heard it in both presentations before me that this is really for treatment-resistant depression, etc., for which other treatments, effective treatments, are simply not available. So this is in line with this requirement. By duly authorized persons, usually under the 71 Convention, duly authorized person means any person, any medical doctor who can prescribe psychotropic substances. But under Schedule 1 for these substances, it is expected that something more, that this should not be any medical practitioner. And however, and it is stated in the commentary that the method by which the restriction is carried out, the restriction of the number of these people who will be prescribing, might be different in different countries. It is for each country to decide how the country will restrict the number of physicians who are allowed to prescribe this and to administer these substances. The Czech Republic decided for the restriction by qualifications. In the government order was explained here what type of psychiatrists, what type of therapeutics are allowed. So there are strict additional requirements for their education, for their qualifications, and this is a method used by the Czech Republic to restrict the number of medical practitioners prescribing and administering substances. This is totally in line with the treaty. This fulfills the requirements of the treaty. There are some other cases in the world. In Australia, there might be an individual license for a doctor, so the doctor will receive individual license. Here, this is the limitation by qualifications, in line with the treaty. Medical establishments directly under control of government, or especially approved by them, specifically approved, again, was mentioned in the presentation. How is it in the Czech Republic? So only establishments under direct control of governments are for the time being allowed to use these substances. And if it would be another establishment, then a license from the Ministry of Health, specific license is necessary. Of course, the question is, what does it mean, establishment? So establishment means something. You should not do it at home. There should be no doctors administering at home of patients. But medical establishment, the commentary says, well, it's very much depends on the country. It might be also an office of a medical practitioner, you know. So the Czechs are much more strict in this respect. If we go to the next slide, this I will go very quickly. So required that manufacture, trade, distribution will be under special license. This is the case in the Czech Republic. Ministry of Health, according to the government order, is issuing such kind of licensing or will be issuing. There should be no supervision. It is expected that there will be inspection, which should, refer to our colleague from the Ministry of Health, perhaps, that should be more frequent than in the case of other psychotropic substances, and that the amounts which are being supplied to persons who are administering, etc., should be restricted to the quantities needed. We have heard how strictly it is regulated in the Czech Republic. Even if in government regulations it is stated how much is allowed to be used and for how many times, etc. The next slide, please. So records are required. The convention says 2 years. The Czechs decided to keep the record for 10 years, and export import, of course, must be under special authorization. This is also the case. So the conclusion was, as it was stated at the beginning, the Czech national legislation totally is in line with the provisions of the 1971 convention. Somebody like the Czech Republic who would like to implement is not violating the treaty. And of course, if this finds approval and if it will confirm the usefulness of this medical approach, then there is no obstacle for governments to inform the World Health Organization and to make suggestions to the World Health Organization to review the status of psilocybin at present in Schedule 1, and maybe the WHO may implement some changes. Or in the past, Delta 9 THC was in Schedule 1, was then moved to Schedule 2 of the 1971. So this is fully in line. Of course, you may decide in your countries for different regimes. There is a lot at the discretion of governments, and please do not be afraid of the conventions. They should serve the people, and the medical, the availability for people for medical purposes is the main objective of the treaty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think we should now move to the question of the discussion.
Okay. We thought it would be good just to have at least 20 minutes for discussion. Actually, you made it fantastically. We have 25. May I ask request you to share with us the Australian experience, because the Czech Republic is not the first one in the globe. We are happy to have the law in reality just working for our patients, but please, if I can ask you to share the Australian experience.
Thank you. And what an exciting time for mental health and psychiatry. So I come from Australia. In our country in 2023, our regulator, our medicines regulator, allowed for MDMA and psilocybin to be used in medical context in this way under a specific scheme called the Authorised Prescriber Scheme. And since that time, we now have 45 psychiatrists that have become authorised prescribers, probably 600 therapists that have been trained, 150 people have been treated with MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, about 110 for psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And we've gone through this process painstakingly slow and have come up against the similar problems in terms of payments. And now the treatment is covered by health insurers and also the Department of Veteran Affairs as of this year. So it's a really exciting time for people to be able to access this care, particularly for psychiatrists. So like we have, now that's 1% of our entire psychiatry population that have become authorised prescribers, and they want to use these tools for their patients that are 2 or 3 treatments down the line and don't have access to this kind of new model of care, and they haven't had a new approach to mental health for a long time. So to see that system be created and to be led by them in the countries, I think it's really exciting. And I'm here because I think this is a global movement across different countries that should be really come to the fore of that policy generally.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. Alexei from Finnish Psychedelic Research Association, among other things. I wanted to ask about the individual medical product. Is that individual in terms of dosing and or other ways? And what do you think about then scaling if you're planning on treating patients in Czech Republic and maybe 14 million in the Ukraine, maybe other EU countries that are also willing to do this? How do you scale that up in terms of producing?
Right, we will prepare psilocybin, so we have contact with the supplier, we have one pharmacy where the psilocybin is, and it's not normally possible to prescribe it on a recipe. A prescription is the same type of prescription like opioids. Loose right. So that's the dose depends on the indications, and typically we dose it from 10 to 35 milligrams. And then is the initial dose when we want to escalate the dose. So typically I'll start with 20-25 milligrams at the beginning. So the full dose, it's also possible to start with the full dose. It depends on the preparation. The treatment has three phases: the preparatory phase, when we map the clinical problem of the patient, and we teach him how to deal with the drug. So the training is based on some mindfulness techniques and such things. So the patients to internalize the attention. The most important thing is not to externalize the attention, not internalize the attention, to decide our own soul, like let's go to cinema. Yeah, that's very important. That is the second period. Is the second phase is the intoxication, and that is so-called integration, and to integrate to psychotherapy the experiences from the sales setting. I guess that we will treat this year and the upcoming years dozens of patients every year in all countries on that is the expected scale, specifically due to it's very demanding, it's long and being the team, and we are looking. But by the way, now we finished the pharmacoeconomic studies that compared the price of psilocybin against ketamine. So the Janssen from the most experienced antidepressant now on the worldwide market, and electroconvulsions. So three treatment procedures. We compare them in the pharmacoeconomic studies. and psilocybin is the cheapest. It's expensive, but not the cheapest specific therapeutic depression. So we can advocate it, the treatment, but at the moment it's very demanding. So dozens, maximum 200, 100 patients every year. So expected.
And then maybe part of the question behind is why you decided to choose individual manufactured substance. It's very pragmatic. Commonly manufactured substance is such a demanding condition for implementation that we decided to do it in an easier way.
Don't like this thing.
Another problem is patenting of psilocybin, because now the British Compass Pathways company holds all the patents for the psilocybin, and it is impossible to use their psilocybin, which is patented because they would take intellectual property from the clinical treatment in Czech Republic. So it's great mess now. So for our studies, we produce our own psilocybin. But for the medical use, for pharmacy, we will buy it as the substance.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is Anton from the Spanish Psychedelic Medicine Association. My question is about how did all this started? Like, who was the initiative about this? It was from the government, from the civil society, the government organization. How was the beginning, and how was the process of making this innovative new approach? Because we're trying to do the same in Spain, but it's kind of difficult.
Group of friends.
I would say, if I may, so there was a virus where this initiation came from, and then suddenly the people started to jump in and help together. We moved the medical together somehow. But it took what 3.5 years from the day one.
With the national fund that we dedicated to introducing the psychedelic and this company, and I decided.
But if I-
hold behind
If I may add, obviously, it's not a question just purely of evidence and data. It's much more a question of these prejudices and education of MPs.
Yeah.
And the duration, the long time we have spent trying to introduce the new bill is namely because of this reality. So from the strategic perspective, I think the key important part of the process was just to educate MPs. And surprisingly, and Jiří said that already, that within the vote in the Czech Parliament, absolute majority of MPs just raised the hand for. So it was like 200 MPs in the Czech Parliament, and I think it was present 177 or something like that, and 100 almost 60 MPs just voted for. So this
Just
is
one against.
so Jiří put it in the context of the tradition of experimenting on scientific base, and also on the clinical base with psilocybin and other psychedelics from early 60s, naming LSD. But this is definitely one part of the reality which was important, but strategically education of members of the parliament, and also sharing and showing that there are growing numbers of affective disorder prevalence or incidents, that there is just this sadly 30% approximately of them which are resistant to standard treatment. Even worse, once we talk about PTSD, and the reality of psychiatry, even though we are happy having all these 3 and 4 generation antidepressants, the reality is that in many diagnostic clusters, still we we move forward in terms of relief of suffering our clients or patients, we move forward very slowly. And Easy, mentioned, for example, eating disorders and mental anorexia, but addictions, chronic, relapsing, coming back and forth, with very often with very little hope. So this is such a promising way forward. My guess is that it will just significantly affect the current psychiatric paradigm. For that, and the question how fast that will happen is probably very much interlinked with the reality of use. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to share that with you and CND, because we think we would be happy just to introduce intervention which is really functioning and helping to those who do not have the access to effective treatment simply because it doesn't exist for them. So I think it's gonna change the psychiatric paradigm.
Another question?
Hi, Robert Legault, Maps. I'm just curious, building on the sort of start you had there, this infrastructure, what do you think about growing to other substances, a broader class of treatment, or potentially moving down the scale from those most difficult to treat to some of the other conditions that psychiatry does struggle with?
So what's on your table?
The problem is, I'm not convinced that psilocybin is the best substance. Psilocybin has the best evidence, definitely yes. It's very popular, why we use, or why we studied from 90s, psilocybin instead of LSD, is the duration of the effect. The problem in LSD is that it's too long, and it's longer than the standard working hours of psychiatrists. 8 hours, and that's the problem. In psilocybin, it's possible to do hours. So that's the advantage. But even though it's too long, and it's unpractical. And my experience also is that psilocybin is quite tricky drug. It's very complicated psychologically for patients. For example, my patients are dying, or there are some of them are in palliative care, and the experiences are sometimes quite horrible. Psilocybin, and they will be well prepared and well conducted during the setting. So the duration is the problem. So I think that the future, and it's also I think that that's the future of psychedelic medicine, are short tryptamines, so tryptamine, 5-meo tryptamine, and we do not know a lot of things from the field which we should know. For example, how deep the intoxication should be or is necessary to be effective. I'm completely convinced that some intoxication is very necessary. We have to the first that the intensity of the trip of the psychedelic experience predicts the antidepressant effect. So the deeper, the better the clinical response. So, and that's, for example, also the reason why Spravato, the Janssen's esketamine, dosed on quite low dose, is less effective than ketamine intravenous, ketamine intravenous, much more or less. But so the effect is seen. So how long and how deep the patient should be. So what we needed now is the evidence for the necessary duration of the intoxication, which is necessary for the prerequisite for the antidepressant effect. And for the clinical practice, the shorter the better, of course, for us. But we do not know it yet. So we have to study the short acting tryptamines now, that's the reasonable beginning out or the reasonable. Next problem is that we have to study the dosing regimes. So the individual intoxication is not the dogma, and now we are introducing the group regime of administration of psilocybin. So in 5 groups of 5 people, together we administer 1 psychiatrist, 2 nurses, and psychological support, but 5 patients together because it's cheaper.
I would like to add It's from the clinical practice perspective, I think in the future, 5-10 years, we will be confronted with a very responsible matching of individual client and the right substance based on a really very careful and a very responsible assessment. And I think even though it's very demanding based on the time spent and also it's quite costly, I guess that because of the window opportunity was mentioned by Easy of 2 months or 6 weeks, doesn't matter, but for example, compared to ketamine or the other classical vitamins, short acting, for example, DMT or 5-mel DMT. I think there will be a significant number of people, patients, clients, eligible for psilocybin, but that's true that MDMA is just as a mass great challenge for trauma work. Have so many advantages. For example, when we talk about the Ukraine, I think from my perspective, that would be probably the first substance I would suggest. Maybe then short-acting DMT or 5-mel DMT because of the timing. So matching wide spectrum of substances and good assessment according to individual needs.
Thank you. There's the gentleman behind you and then.
I'm Kacper Kantorski, Social Initiative for Narcopolitics from Poland. Unfortunately, in Poland, psilocybin is the most restricted group with heroin, with no medical use and high risk of addiction. So it's pretty harsh for us to block people without medicalization. But my question concerns psychotherapy, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy school in Czech Republic. What were the origins of starting it? Where was it in the timeline in the process of legalization and becoming psilocybin?
I hold the first round on ketamine. It was volunteers in 1990, something 9 or 8. So that was the first. Before that, we have several studies on different psychedelic pathologic threats. So the first human study began in the late 90s. During that study, the psilocybin study was discovered in America. Was discovered that there was an effect of ketamine. It was discovered in 2000 by Bergman from US and shifted the preclinical research to clinical research. Yeah, at that moment, because up to 2000 there were no medical indications for psychedelics. It was discovered by ketamine to 2000. So and from that time, we had many research projects on different diagnoses. That's the tradition lasting 30 years. We made a group of friends and all this, and so that's the mechanism behind the organization.
But there might be momentum currently in Poland.
Yes. Can I ask you regarding the Poland? So are you saying that the regulation in Poland, national regulation, goes beyond the treaties with international law?
I intervene. No, it is aligned with the treaty, like the substance which is prohibited. But of course, it is possible to use it for very limited medical purposes. So they may modify if they wish. The government easily may modify the law. For the time being, as in the past in the Czech Republic, the government thinks yes, it is the best solution for the time being, is aligned with the treaty. But there is no problem from the point of view of, let's say, INCB of international drug control, if you modify your treaty and continue to do it in compliance with Article 7 of
The question of willingness first, second, support from the expert associations, third, good education of MPs and lobbying, and certainly you need a political support. So there must be somebody who is just pushing forward.
Any ideas how we can, not with the political will?
Yes.
I think very quite in my view, the very important step was when we start to discriminate between drugs of dependence or addiction and psychedelics. As psychedelics definitely do not produce any addiction. They do not offer the dopaminergic effect. So from a pharmacological point of view, they do not belong to the same group. Yeah, so they have its own risks. Psychedelics are tricky drugs. There are many psychological risks. It can produce the major risk is that it can produce something like PTSD. The people can be traumatized by the bad trip or challenging experience, and that's the goal, and we have to avoid. But the risks are completely different from stimulants and opioids. So discriminate not to the same group. I told the government that to everybody, they do not produce. They can change. Like the DQs. They can change it, and it was not just by the chance that Nixon put it on the blacklist of the schedule. It can change political orientation of people. It can change spirituality, and we have to deal also with this side of psychedelics. That they can change opinion in the volunteers, and it's also a matter of ethics. Not when we use it in treatment, so we are being very careful about the worldview of the client, and to not input our own worldview to keep the treatment strictly within the worldview of the client, not of me, etc. So there are some rules which are quite important. Thank you.
I'm happy you said that, because I think changing the language is extremely important. Remember, we are too young, but 20 years ago here, to use the term harm reduction was just forbidden. It was impossible. Now we are sharing that as a mainstream paradigm. So I think a good thing is really to repeat and repeat. This is not a drug. In a sense, we understand the term because not producing the addiction, because of the simple reason, as Jiří said, not affecting the dopaminergic receptor system. And
Thank you. Sorry, Tadeusz, the lady, your question.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tadeusz Szadlet. I'm here with Area Psychedelic Access and Research European Alliance. So I want to start by sincerely congratulating you, because I think what it really cannot be overstated just how important it is that what you have done globally, one of the very few countries globally, the first one in the EU. Also, you are moving so swiftly with now with kind of setting up treatment parameters with the highest scientific and ethical rigor, and you have so much kind of mandate from from parliamentarians and so on. The question I have is maybe just to set the context. I was wondering whether you see any possibility in the years to come, once you have this concrete pathway, but do you see, as you treat more patients, as you accumulate more data, that this could be something that could then be moved to your regulator, to your Czech agency for medicines or state institute for drug control, if they see enough clinical trials, if they see enough real world data? Would there be a possibility for them to market, for instance, psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, or you don't see such a possibility? And I'm asking also because we know there are now around 30 clinical trials in late stages, stage 2, stage 3, like 7 or 8 in stage 3. We will soon see approvals in the next 12 months or so. But all the companies that are doing trials are focusing on the US, and I don't see anything happening in Europe commercially, in this decade. But these national initiatives could really spur, and then kind of, there could be more in Europe. And if your drug agency approves psilocybin for TRD without, compass or whatever, other countries in Europe would follow to this national recognition procedure. Do you see any kind of way of going into this direction, or not? Not really.
yes, sure. I think we work with EMA to make sure that we will not be alone as the Czech Republic. Actually, we are not, because 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, once we introduced the law in the Czech Republic of voted for, the Germans introduced the compassionate use of psilocybin. So I mean, the so-called positive marketing effect, in the sense of just producing and sharing the good practice, is just here. And I think if I can't imagine, one of the famous Czech psychiatrists, beside Jiří Horáček, is Stanislav Grof, who stayed, not only Stanislav Grof, at that time he was very young, and there are many other names, a few other names which are important as far as the history of psychedelic use in a clinical venues or settings in the Czech Republic are concerned, Milan Hausner and others. But Stanislav Grof said, well, be careful not to fuck it up. As that happened in 60s. And so we are very careful about that. But I don't think that will happen. We certainly have to be very careful. I don't think it will happen.
Thank you. And last question, and then because we are already late.
You talked about the post-traumatic stress of the psychedelic experience itself. Is that documented within the therapeutic context? I worked in psychedelics here because people obviously experience traumatic psychedelic experiences, so there's not teaching to them. But within the therapeutic context, is that frequent?
Well, I can respond on behalf of my experience, and I have 35 years clinical experience with working with psychedelics. So yes, we say in the Czech language, náročná psychedelická zkušenost, demanding psychedelic experience, and as we know, as deeper the experience is, as Jiří said, then the positive outcomes are more expected. So yes, we can see if there is a not well provided integration, if there is not well supervised the intoxication session, if there is not a careful preparatory job before, that might really happen. If everything is in place according to the best practice guidelines, the probability, the chance, it exists. I don't know, extremely, very low. So I think therefore that the law says psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. So we know that really to make sure that the process and the experience, the benefits for clients must be done by trained professionals, focused at psychotherapeutic integration, but also the preparatory phase is extremely important. Because if the preparatory phase well done is missing, then certainly the experience and the process must be much more difficult.
So I strictly use term battery instead of challenging experience. I use battery because it is battery. Battery is quite as Pavel said, quite rare. This thing, it's idiosyncratic nature. It's something completely different from the psychedelic experience. It depends on preparatory, the quality on the and on the dose of the drugs. The higher the dose, the more having such feature. The problem is that despite the fact that it can traumatize the patient, and it's really horrible. It's paranoid. It's paranoid anxiety, and it consists of anxiety and paranoid symptoms, and it's really awful. I did it once because I participated in the study I did. Magnetic resonance was really horrible to suicide. But we have some other patients. go together with him or her through it. There are techniques how to help him, how to change again from the bad trip to the normal cycle experience, and the clinical outcome. The antidepressant outcome is the same or even better than normal sleep. Yeah, so from a clinical point of view, it's not so problematic. Yeah, the insights are very deep. The psychological level is fine if the client survives it. He or she survived it, so it's fine. And the information is also quite good for that. We try to avoid it, but it could happen. Especially in my sample of the oncological patients, it's quite frequent because people are scared about death and so on. And all these fears propagates to the phenomenology.
But we should also look at the safety profile of substances like psilocybin is very, very safe. And if I look at so-called safety profiles or unexpected or maybe expected negative collateral effects of antidepressant therapy, we see much more frequently having our clients or patients struggles with antidepressants compared to psychedelics, even though I don't want to just compare the deep state of the altered or outstanding state of mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you for before we finish, the last thing I would like to invite you on this topic. We are organizing the government together with the Psychedelics Europe and Cyrus. We are organizing a conference 13th of October in Prague. We all welcome to Prague Castle. Yes. And thank you very much, all the panelists. Thank you very much.